Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The General and the Handcuffs, the day the Pentagon responded. In the peaceful streets of Springdale, an affluent residential suburb about 30 kilometers from Washington, D.C., nature still seemed asleep under the soft rays of a spring sun. Cherry blossoms lined the sidewalks, dropping their pink petals like a silent rain. The perfectly trimmed lawns reflected the apparent order of a privileged world, where white picket fences symbolized an ideal of peace, but barely masked the invisible fractures of society. Beneath this apparent tranquility, a deep unease persisted, an old unease, rooted in history, that of suspicious glances at black faces in white neighborhoods, of awkward silences at neighborhood meetings, of inherited prejudices passed down like habits. It was in this deceptively serene setting that General Charles Everett. Aged 58, this imposing man wore his dress uniform with understated elegance. His erect, almost regal posture betrayed decades of military discipline. A veteran of 2 wars and a graduate of West Point, he had served his country with unwavering loyalty. On his chest, the military decorations gleamed in the morning light, but it was the brilliance of his 4-star general on his epaulets that attracted attention, a rare symbol, synonymous with respect and power throughout the military hierarchy. He had just left a confidential breakfast at the Four Seasons Hotel with Senator Elijah Brooks, a rising figure in Congress. Together, they had discussed sweeping reforms regarding veterans' psychological support. Charles had walked leisurely out of the room, greeted the staff warmly, and climbed into his black sedan, a official Lincoln with registration, Def USA, vehicle reserved for high-ranking officers. The general was going to the military base of Fort Ashton, where he was to deliver an expected speech on ethical leadership in times of crisis in front of officers of all ranks. He was driving at a moderate speed, enjoying a rare moment of calm, his left hand on the steering wheel, the other absent-mindedly leafing through some notes lying on the passenger seat. But just a few blocks from the base, as he slowed to a stop at a flashing light, unmarked police car, a white Ford SUV with no visible markings, suddenly appears behind him. Siren blaring. Red and blue lights flashing. A brutal order over the loudspeaker. Driver of the black vehicle, stop immediately. Turn off the engine and get out with your hands up. Taken aback, the general immediately complied. He parked the vehicle on the shoulder, turned off the ignition, and sat calmly, his hands clearly visible on the steering wheel. He looked in his rearview mirror and saw 2 figures quickly get out of the police vehicle. One of them, Officer Travis Hargrove, in his 40s, tall, hard-faced, shaved head, got out first. A veteran of the service, he was known for his aggressive behavior during checks, and several complaints for excessive use of force were gathering dust in the police station drawers. He advanced with brutal confidence, his hand already placed on his weapon. Behind him stood Agent Mark Riley, 36 years old, younger, more hesitant, his eyes shifty. He was new to the district and still impressed by the aura of his teammate, whom he followed in all things without daring to question his orders. They had, they said, received a radio alert about a black man wearing a suspicious military uniform, driving a government vehicle reported stolen. The information came from an anonymous caller, with no evidence, no specific license plate, just a stereotype disguised as a description. But in their already biased minds, that was enough. And before them was exactly that, a black man, in ceremonial uniform, driving an official vehicle. They didn't see the 4 stars, nor the medals. They saw the skin. The presence seemed suspect to them. The elegance? Too perfect. The calm gaze? Arrogant. He didn't fit with the image they had of authority. For them, there was only one possibility: fraudster, impostor, danger. General Everett, unsuspecting as he was, suddenly felt the tension thicken in the air. He knew that look, those postures. He had seen them 100 times around the world, but not always on his own soil. He was going to experience, at that precise moment, a head-on collision between his status as a senior officer and his reality as a black man in America. Without giving the general the slightest chance to speak or hand over his papers, the 2 police officers leaped out of their vehicle, weapons drawn, combat posture, looks charged with adrenaline and suspicion. "Get out of the vehicle. Immediately." "Hands up," screamed Hargrove, his voice tense, more from ego than from real danger. The scream split the air like a gunshot, already attracting a few glances from the open windows of the surrounding houses. Joggers slowed down, passers-by stopped in disbelief. This was clearly not a bandit on the run, but a man in full military uniform, calmly getting out of his car. General Everett, his face frozen, frowned slightly. He wasn't panicked or aggressive. He'd experienced far more hostile terrain, real-life ambushes, life-or-death decisions under enemy fire. But this situation, here in a quiet neighborhood of Virginia, had a different gravity. A more muted gravity, the gravity of an unjustified humiliation. Of a questioning of his humanity. He slowly opened the door of his Lincoln, raised his hands, and cautiously got out. "My name is General Charles Everett, Service Number 009, GE. You are mistaken. Here is my badge." He raised his hand to his chest to show the metal plaque engraved with his name, but no sooner had he moved than Hargrove advances abruptly, while Riley, nervous, pointed his weapon at the general's head, his hands trembling. "On your knees!" Riley yelled, his voice rising in pitch. He wasn't sure if it was fear or confusion. A heavy silence fell for a split second. Everett, in that time, observed everything, the sweat on Riley's forehead, the pent-up rage in Hargrove's eyes, and above all, the complete lack of listening. Nothing he said would be heard. Then, with an almost disturbing calm, he slowly knelt on the warm asphalt, his hands still raised. "I am cooperating, officers. But you are making a mistake you will deeply regret." But this sentence only aggravated Hargrove's arrogance. In a few seconds, General Everett was thrown to the ground with unnecessary violence, his face grazed the asphalt, his wrists twisted roughly behind his back, the cold metal of the handcuffs snapping shut. His cap slid to the pavement. His metals clinked, displaced and crushed by the weight of the bodies holding him down. His military badge, torn from his chest, was carelessly thrown to the ground as he slid down to the gutter. Passers-by had now gathered on the sidewalk. Among them, a woman in her 50s, wearing a sports dress and holding a cell phone, was filming the scene live. "He's not a thief, he's a general," she cried, beside herself. An old lady, in a dressing gown, stepped out onto her steps and watched in horror. A teenager whispered, "Is this America? Even black generals are treated like criminals." More Hargrove, imperturbable, sneered, looking down at the crowd with a cold gaze. "A black general in an official car? Of course. And I'm the president." His hollow laugh echoed through the street, more chilling than mocking. He straightened up, dusting off his police uniform as if he had just performed a glorious deed. As they held him down, gasping for breath and his hands tied behind his back, General Everett maintained an almost preternatural calm. Despite the humiliation, the dull pain in his wrists, and the crush of his uniform on the asphalt, he slowly raised his head to face his captors. "Can I make a call? You'll understand quickly." His voice, firm but calm, resonated with a natural authority that seemed to suddenly redraw the boundaries of the situation. Agent Riley exchanged a hesitant look with Hargrove. Anxiety and doubt crossed his features. He wasn't sure if this man was a mere suspect, but the idea of intervening against a high-ranking officer seemed unreal. Yet Hargrove stubbornly shook his head, refusing categorically. "No. No way. Stay where you are." But the passers-by, now numerous, watched silently. Murmurs rose. The woman filming on the sidewalk seemed ready to broadcast the video live on social media. The snowball effect seemed inevitable. Sensing the pressure mounting, and calculating the possibility of changing the course of events, Hargrove finally released his grip with a sudden movement. "Take roll call, but hurry." With measured slowness, Charles Everett placed his cuffed wrists on his knees, searching his inside pocket for a thin card. He carefully removed it and handed it to Riley. "This is the direct number for the office of the Secretary of Defense." A tense silence fell as Everett, in a clear, determined voice, dictated the number aloud. Each syllable seemed to click like an order. Office of the Secretary of Defense, Colonel Simmons speaking. Simmons, this is General Charles Everett. I am currently being held, handcuffed, on the ground by 2 officers from the Springdale Police Department. I'll leave this to you. A moment of silence, heavy as a blade. Roger that, General. Don't move. We're sending reinforcements immediately. Barely 6 minutes passed. The roar of engines shook the asphalt. A fleet of black, armored vehicles burst onto the street. 2 massive SUVs stamped, military police, and several sedans with federal plates lined up in battle formation. Federal agents, impeccably dressed, armed, and determined, quickly descended, exuding an aura of undeniable authority. They flashed their badges, instantly silencing the murmur of the crowd. Release this man immediately. This is General Charles Everett. The Springdale police officer's eyes widened, then paled. The confrontation was slipping away from them. Hargrove stammered, desperate to justify his actions. But, he matched the description. A federal agent, with a hard face and an icy expression, glared at him. You have just assaulted one of the highest-ranking officers in the U.S. military. Prepare to answer for your actions. At that moment, the weight of reality hit the 2 police officers. They were no longer in control. The military chain of command had just forcefully reminded them that some men could not be treated so lightly, especially not a general. General Everett stood up slowly, without abruptness, as if giving this moment all the gravity it deserved. Silence had settled around him, thick and respectful. Even the birds seemed to have fallen silent. The asphalt had left a dark mark on his impeccably pressed trousers. His crumpled right shoulder still bore the mark of the brutal hand that had pinned him to the ground. But his gaze was clear. Implacable. Lucid. He mopped his forehead with a white silk handkerchief, calmly taken from the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he squatted down with dignity, picked up his star badge, stroked it with his thumb for a moment, and fixed it again on his chest. This gesture, simple but powerful, seemed to say, I'm standing. I'm still here. And you haven't taken anything away from me. He then turned to the 2 frozen, livid police officers, unable to speak. He looked them straight in the eyes, without apparent anger, but with a firmness that shone through. This isn't the first time I've been mistaken for a criminal. But it will be the last time you arrest a man because of the color of his skin. These words, captured by several recording phones, were to become a historical sentence. A few hours later, the video was everywhere. On YouTube, on news channels, on social media. The general's face, calm, standing firm in the face of humiliation, contrasted sharply with the brutal actions of his attackers. In less than 24 hours, the hashtag General Everett went viral, trending in more than 30 countries. Former soldiers, artists, judges, teachers, and young black people from across the country shared the video, writing, "This is what you go through, even after giving it your all." The President of the United States himself called General Everett the next morning. According to sources, the conversation was sober and solemn. The head of state presented an official apology, on behalf of the nation, and promised that an independent investigation would be opened. The 2 policemen, Travis Hargrove and Mark Riley, were suspended from duty with immediate effect. The Springdale Police Department, under national pressure, initially tried to downplay the case, citing a communication error. But faced with the media frenzy and the direct intervention of the Department of Justice, the case was transferred to federal court. 3 weeks later, the trial opened in Washington, D.C., under the spotlight of cameras from around the country. Lines formed at dawn outside the courthouse. Veterans in uniform mingled with African American families who had come in solidarity. Some carried signs. "I am Charles Everett. Respect our heroes. This has to change." The accusations were serious. Excessive use of force. Arbitrary detention. Aggravated racial discrimination. Insult to a representative of the armed forces in exercise. In the packed courtroom, General Everett testified without hatred, but with a disconcerting lucidity. His voice carried far, each word weighed like a command. I don't need these men destroyed. What I ask is for this nation to finally open its eyes. If a man like me, elevated to the highest military honor, can be thrown to the ground without justification, then what hope is there for our sons? For those who have no badge, no uniform, no protection? The word struck a chord with America. Social media, television networks, even conservative editorials acknowledged the obvious: this trial was not just about two police officers. It was about a system. Both officers were found guilty. Hargrove was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Riley, after pleading guilty and expressing sincere remorse, received a 2-year suspended sentence and a permanent ban from law enforcement. The Springdale Police Department, meanwhile, was placed under federal guardianship for a year. He had to present a public apology on national television, and was forced to implement a far-reaching reform program: mandatory anti-racial bias training, external oversight, independent audit of all excessive force cases from the past 5 years. The General Charles Everett did not ask for compensation or indemnity. He did not pursue any media outlets, did not respond to the numerous offers of exclusive interviews or publishing contracts that flooded in. When a famous host offered him a primetime slot to tell his story to the world, he politely declined, simply replying, "It's not my story that matters. It's what it reveals." He continued to serve the Army with the same rigor and discretion. He resumed his lecture tours at military academies, speaking to young recruits not about his arrest, but about the art of remaining upright in adversity, the power of calm in the face of injustice, and above all, of the strength of a man who chooses honor over revenge. But what the general had not sought, the nation, for its part, offered it to him spontaneously. A few months later, under a clear and vast sky above the Fort Liberty military base, a ceremony of rare solemnity took place. High-ranking military personnel, veterans, young recruits, civilian officials and soldiers' families gathered to attend the re-inauguration of a historic building, the base's former strategic conference room, once used for crisis meetings at the height of the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. On that day, it was to be officially renamed Charles Everett Hall, for justice, honor, and truth. General Everett, present, stood as straight as an oak, dressed in his most sober uniform. He hadn't wanted a fanfare. But the Army had insisted. It knew this room would become more than a place, a symbol. In front of the newly restored entrance, a bronze plaque was unveiled. The engraved letters shone solemnly. The uniform does not protect against ignorance. But dignity resists everything. The silence in the assembly was complete. Only the sound of the wind gently blowing through the raised flags reminded us that time had not stood still. A young 21-year-old black soldier, visibly moved, stood up spontaneously and saluted the general with a trembling hand. "General, I joined the Army doubting whether I really belonged there. Today, thanks to you, I no longer have any doubts." The general simply nodded, his eyes misty. No speech, no grand oratory, his silence was worth more than any words. Very quickly, the Everett Room became a place of reference in military academies. Each class of cadets passed through there at least once to follow special training, command and integrity under pressure. At the entrance, the training officers explained that General Everett's story was not a tragic exception, but a truth to ponder. Greatness is not measured by the stars we wear, but the way we defend them without ever abusing them. The West Point and Annapolis schools integrated a module called Ethical Leadership and Racial Justice, taking the general as an example modern figure of moral command. Students from African American high schools visited the hall each year, guided by veterans. Letters from children were even posted on an adjacent wall. "Thank you, General Everett. You show us that we can be black, dignified, and powerful without ever looking down. I want to become like you. Not just a soldier, but a righteous man." And so, without ever shouting, without ever hitting, without ever taking revenge, General Charles Everett had become a living legend. Not for commanding troops in battle, but for standing up, knees on the ground, the very essence of what a just nation should be. His story became a landmark, a warning, and above all, a beacon.